Hello there, everybody. I am the CHALL, and welcome to the first ever NBA Fans Thoughts Show. Now, this is where we pick a specific game that we reviewed over the last 24 hours and get a fan's opinion on the matter. A real die-hard fan, since most of you know I'm an NBA neutral. And today we've got this wonderful guy from Mainstream Mavs Podcast. Go and check it out. The links are all in the description down below. How are you doing over there in Dallas?
It's looking grim on the Mavericks front, but I imagine it's probably not as cold over here as it is in the UK, so it's not too terrible.
Yeah, it's been freezing in the UK. I'm not gonna lie. It's like Game of Thrones. Winter has come. Overall, then, let's focus on the performance. Then, obviously, you're losing 105 to 100 to the Raptors in Toronto. Overall, as a performance, before we pick out individuals, how would you sort of sum up the performance? Because from the looks of it, the Raptors knew exactly what they were doing.
Yeah, you look just from the start of the game, the Raptors were blitzing Luka in the pick and roll continuously, and there was really nobody on the Mavericks side of it, things that was able to step up whatsoever. We have the continued struggles of Reggie Bullock and Tim Hardaway Jr., where they're really not providing much of anything on the defensive side of the ball, and they haven't been able to make their wide open shots. It's really showing how one dimensional this Mavericks roster is, right? They don't, outside of Spencer Dinwiddie and Luka Doncic, they don't have guys who can create their own shot. And, also last night, the Mavericks got pounded on the boards. Chris Boucher, he was having their way with them. I can't remember the exact numbers in terms of how much they got out rebounded by, but there were a ton of offensive rebounds on the Raptors side, and the Mavericks as a whole just looked really dragged down, like they weren't really even ready to come out for this game, and that's kind of been an ongoing theme for this team this season. They've struggled against teams who are missing their best players. With the Raptors last night, they had Precious Achiuwa out. Siakam wasn't playing. Scotty Barnes was out. There have been, a lot of games this year where the Mavericks have played down to lesser opponents who have some of their top players out. Like there was a game versus the Pelicans this year where Brandon Ingram, Zion, and not CJ, but I think it was Herb Jones also was out. And, the same against the Wizards. They had Bradley Beal and KP out. When we played the Magic and they had Banchero out. There have just been some really ugly losses. So, needless to say, the Mavericks have a lot of things that, they're going to have to mend just from a mental perspective in terms of not playing down to their opponents.
Absolutely. It feels like, and this is where I got from it, I think the Mavericks are at that stage in their franchise where they're not at the rebuild stage, but it's the stage before the rebuild. It's like it's the tough period before the rebuild, because either you're going to have to free up Luka Doncic to sort of bring a more collective unit through, or you're going to have to bring in someone who's a real ball handler, someone who can have a decent scoring record like a Doncic, or just under a Doncic type scoring record than usual. But one thing I noticed during the match specifically, this particular one, was it looks like it wasn't Doncic on his own getting the points. It felt like the points were being shared around a lot more, which meant Doncic's numbers went down, but the overall performance just wasn't there. It was like the rest of the guys didn't pick up to Doncic's level. It's like Doncic kind of fell down to their level in a bit, and that's sort of one thing I wanted to pick on, really. And there was one particular player that I sort of see as a standout for all the wrong reasons, which was Reggie Bullock. Didn't have much of an impact at all. And I know a few fans are questioning on social media whether he should even be here.
Yeah, no, most definitely. Reggie has continuously throughout his career had these rough starts to the season, and you can kind of justify it in any way, shape, or form of, he's going to regress back to the mean and shoot better in a couple months or whatever. But this particular start to the season for him has, from at least, just from the eye test at least, has seemed worse than some of his previous starts to the season. And even particularly on the defensive end, he's getting beat off single dribble blow-bys a lot more. He's not even really holding down the fort on that end, something that he could at least be, consistent with despite his shot not falling at all. And he just looks generally inconfident on offense. He's passed up a lot of open looks. He'll pump fake, have a relative open look and swing the ball outside on the perimeter just because he doesn't want to shoot it. And I mean, he has to be least in. He has to be like bottom 10 in the NBA in drives per game or points off drives. I can definitely count on one hand the amount of times he's actually been able to attack off a closeout and make a mid-range jump shot or get to the rim. He's very much a one-dimensional, basketball player, and he is like really the definition of a prototypical 3 and D player in the NBA. But when you don't have neither the 3 or D working for you at the moment, it warrants the narrative that he should probably not play as much and that we should get some other guys in that rotation. The Mavericks are kind of limited in terms of their personnel, but I think a guy that a lot of Mavericks fans have looked to fill that void a little more than Reggie has is Josh Green. I think a lot of Mavericks fans would like Josh Green to be relegated to Reggie's role and Reggie to maybe fill that 15 to 20 minute per game status until his shooting comes back into fruition. Because if the Mavericks really don't have a lot of roster flexibility, they may not be able to get off of Bullock right now. So in the meantime, you have to be able to make the best rotation decisions if you're Jason Kidd. But we've seen through about, give or take, it's only been 18 games, but he has had this sort of stubborn aspect to him where he's kind of negligent to make decisions that as fans we think might benefit the team.
Absolutely, and I think one other player that a lot of Mavs fans wanted to see a lot more was Christian Wood. I mean, would you see the reasons behind Christian Wood? Because I think there has been occasions where he has put up the numbers, but not as much as what people would have liked. However, there is still that outcry from some fans that would like to see him given more minutes ahead of someone like a Reggie Bullock or that type of player. So would you see Christian Wood a lot more coming into this side, or would you like to see Christian Wood come into this side but maybe not expect it much from the head coach?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mavs Twitter is kind of split in terms of what they think about Christian Wood, but I think the consensus around Mavs Twitter is that he should be starting nonetheless, right? I think a lot of fans are, saying, "Oh, he's not the idealistic big man fit next to Luka. He doesn't set good screens. His offense can be kind of spotty at times." And I mean, I think that those questions for some fans can be valid to an extent. I'm more on the high side of Christian Wood, right? I think that the dynamism that he showed with Luka and the pick and roll and pick and pop has been really, um, really a revelation to see, and it's something that this team hasn't had really since Kristaps Porzingis was actually playing well and consistent for this team. Probably, you go back to the bubble, right? But in terms of Christian Wood and how he's played this year, a lot of his minutes have been mirrored with those non-Luka minutes, and in those scenarios, he's kind of being tasked with having to furbish his own offense, which I think too for him, he can do in spurts. But particularly in those minutes, you have Spencer Dinwiddie as the only primary ball handler, a guy who's kind of notorious around Mavericks fans for not being able to throw an entry pass. And, that by de facto of that, Christian Wood isn't really able to get those post up and isolation possessions in those non-Luka minutes. He kind of has to rely on just general team ball movement being really good, which is kind of hit or miss in those minutes. We'll see with the when Luka's not out there. So, I mean, I think offensively, I think his best fit is when he's mirroring those Luka minutes. That's when we've seen him be most prevalent. That's when we've seen him be most dominant, right? There are obviously the defensive question marks as well. Christian Wood, he's probably more suited to be able to guard threes and fours. He has a decent amount of foot speed, but most of his where he's honestly a big liability is as a rim protector. He's not a guy who's going to be able to help weak side and you know come block a guy in the dunker spot. He is negligent to close out. He has some issues in terms of running out to shooters on the perimeter. This is a guy that you idealistically want to maybe put on some kind of like smaller centers or some threes that are, more of this, your typical 3-and-D type who are just going to kind of stand in the corner, work around screens, not guys who, you know, are going to put him in a drop coverage type of scenario where he's going to have to either come up and hedge on the screen and guard a primary ball handler or drop back and have to defend the rim. I mean, those are just not his strong suits, right? And so, I get the pushback from Mavericks fans in terms of his fit. But like I said, the consensus around Mavericks fans is that he should be starting nonetheless, because at the very least, even if you think that he's not a good fit with this team, Mavericks gave up from a first round pick for him. So there has to be some sort of value play there where, even if he's not a long term fit, we at least want to show him off in the starting lineup and play him 30 minutes per game, at least get those numbers up. We don't want a distressed asset on this team. And, because of that, the Mavericks are kind of objectively failed in terms of, managing his minutes in the rotation this year. I think that that's what a lot of fans would, the consensus would probably be.
Absolutely. Obviously, the MVP, I guess, of the Mavericks is Luka Doncic at the moment. And what is the best outcome for him? Is it move him on or play around him? And can you bring in someone to play with him? Is he just that one-man show that the Mavericks just have to work around? Or is it more practical to free up Doncic to bring in a collection of stars rather than just the star?
To define that number two next to Luca, right? I think that that's the question that's puzzling this organization ever since they made that Kristaps Porzingis trade, and that didn't work out, right? That's something that they have yet to be determined. The Mavericks really are in a tricky spot, like you had mentioned at the top, from the standpoint that they don't have a lot of leniency to make these type of moves that a lot of teams can do to go get a second star. They don't have, really outside of Josh Green, they don't have that intriguing young player that can lead a big trade package. They will, if they do renounce the protections on their pick, they would have 3 first-round picks that would be able to be traded. So that will help them in the long run in terms of their pursuit of a second star. I think that as an organization, all signs point towards that being something that they want to do. But it's just really tricky because they're basically in this sort of situation where they have to play the waiting game right now, right? They, are kind of just, all right, let's see what we got with Jaden Hardy and Josh Green. Are these guys going to be good enough to potentially lead a trade package to go get that coveted second star, right? And, when the opportunity comes and a disgruntled star is on the market, the Mavericks have a lot of these more negative contracts, and Tim Hardaway Jr. and Davis Bertans, right? Guys that are getting paid 16, almost, 19, $20 million that are viewed as negative assets around the league due to the fact, from Tim Hardaway Jr.'s standpoint, him being just a shell of himself compared to what he was in Dallas in the 2019-20 season. And in Bertans' case, him just his shooting regressed a little when he was with Washington. And I mean, he's still a really good shooter, but it's just still a severe overpay for a guy of his caliber at $16 million. So the Mavericks have these sort of salary filler guys that they can, kind of mix and match in any sort of trade to get the numbers up, to get that star player who is probably going to be at that pretty high dollar amount, right? But it's just a matter of if the team that they're negotiating with would accept a package like that, because, admittedly, there's probably a lot of better packages around the league. And it's sort of just this weird balance where we don't know how it's going to work out really over the next 6 months to a year. We're going to have to see if the Mavericks are able to pull something off come this offseason, come this trade deadline. It just does kind of look a little dry on that front at the moment because just of the negative assets that they have, and they're just kind of hard struck in their ability to make any moves. But in terms of, is Luka going to leave? I mean, it could be something that arises in a year or two, and it's something that the Mavericks have to be, overtly cautious of. They can't take their chances there. You'd lose a generational player, right? He could easily become disgruntled if this sort of perpetual mediocrity that the Mavericks have of, yes, they made the Western Conference Finals last year, but say they have another 2 playoff runs where, they're a play-in team or just a first-round exit, you have to be extremely cognizant of the potential of Luka leaving. But, at the same time, the Mavericks as a whole are not looking to rebuild. They're not by any stretch of the imagination, looking in that direction yet. They're going to milk as much as they can out of Luka Doncic being in Dallas. And that just the question is if they can do it in time before the door is open and Luka's on his way out. But I think we're a little bit of ways from there at the moment. But that's not to say that that's, something that could arise down the line. That's still something that is very prevalent and something that Mavericks fans are very cognizant of.
Absolutely, and I guess the final thing really is you've got the next game against the Bucks. Obviously, it's 1 o'clock in the morning our time, so obviously stay tuned for that one. But no, you're coming up against the Milwaukee Bucks, who, to be honest, they're a good team. They've obviously got Giannis Antetokounmpo, who is the Greek freak. He's just another level at the moment, and they've got a good collective of players around him. I mean, how do you stop the Bucks? Because the Raptors saw a way to guard Doncic with the 2 on him, and I think the Raptors pretty much gave a tactic to every other team in the NBA, pretty much, of what to do against Luka Doncic. So how are you going to stop the Bucks, who could very well do the same thing what the Raptors did, and that's now double up on Luka Doncic and play around the rest of them?
Yeah, I mean, the Raptors have a lot of switchable wings, and I think that they have, I'm not going to say they're more tailor-made to guard Luka, because we've seen Luka use that drag dribble to find the middle of the floor in the short roll and be able to, when his teammates are hitting shots and guys are able to attack off closeouts effectively and teams are doubling Luka a lot, that can really come to the other team's detriment. We've seen that when teams do that the Mavericks actually end up being wildly successful in those scenarios. The Bucks are historically have been kind of a tough play for the Mavericks from the standpoint that, Giannis can, they do kind of tend to, from what I've seen in previous matchups, sometimes they try to save Giannis on Luka, throw some other guys like, Drew. I've seen Drew Holiday guard Luka quite a bit. They'll throw Connaughton on him. They kind of give him, sort of the full array of guys. They'll try and throw a lot of guys on Luka. But when the going gets tough, you'll see Giannis on him, who, 2-time defensive player of the year. This is a guy who is going to be able to at least put up a fight in those matchups, despite how skilled Doncic is, right? And this year specifically, the Bucks have done a really good job in towards of funneling guys to Brook Lopez, who's been, one of the best rim protectors in the league. So, admittedly, Luka, it's maybe a little bit tougher for him to get into the paint this game. That's not to say he's not going to be able to whatsoever, because he's a generational talent, and this is a guy who, when he wants to get there and he wills his way there, he's going to get there, right? But he may have to defer a little bit more in this game, especially if he's able to get into that painted area. You have those trees kind of collapse on in him and Giannis and Brook Lopez. He does a really good job of kicking out to shooters, of course. So, I think a couple solutions to sort of how the Bucks might play Luka in this game is, especially what we've seen in the past. Luka utilized the mid-range a lot against the Bucks in the last 2 years, especially against Lopez, because, Brook Lopez, pure drop coverage big. He's going to stay back, and he's not a guy that you want treading out onto the perimeter whatsoever. That's not really his strong suit, right? So Luka may defer to the mid-range a lot in this game, and I think that he'll probably start that sort of domino effect where he kicks it out. Once he gets into the paint to the guy at the top of the key of the wing, they kind of swing it around, and eventually a Maverick is wide open for a shot in the corner or on the wing. So I think that those might be some of the two avenues to success for the Mavericks on offense tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Mate, thank you very, very much for coming on the Fans' Thoughts today for the NBA. Obviously, we'll try and get you back on the channel at some point, along with some other fans from other teams, to talk about the NBA draft for 2023. But thanks for coming on.
Yeah, for sure, man. I had a great time. This is something new, and I was definitely glad to be a part of it.
Thank you very much, and thank you guys as well for watching. There'll be more fans' thoughts throughout the regular season and the playoff campaign. There will be fan channels, there will be podcasts, there will be journalists, there will be all kinds of NBA creators from all different departments from all around the world. So stay tuned for more on the fans' thoughts. I am the CHALL. Ta-ra for now.